Jake Morrison stepped off the transport ship and immediately felt the cold hit his face like a wall of ice. The wind on Carrion Prime was harsh and bitter, carrying tiny crystals that stung his skin. He pulled his jacket tighter around his body and looked up at the massive palace in front of him. The building was made entirely of ice and crystal, rising high into the gray sky like a frozen mountain. Blue and white lights danced inside the walls, making the whole structure glow with an otherworldly beauty. Jake had seen pictures of it in the mission briefings, but nothing had prepared him for seeing it in person. "Stay close to the group," Ambassador Helen Carter called out to her team. She was a tall woman with gray hair and sharp eyes, known throughout the colonial navy for her skill in difficult negotiations. "The Kyrians don't like it when visitors wander off." Jake nodded and fell into step behind her. He was the youngest member of the diplomatic team, chosen for this mission because of his engineering background. The Kyrians were facing a crisis with their heating systems, and Earth needed their rare crystals for new technology. It was supposed to be a simple trade agreement. The palace doors opened as they approached, revealing two tall figures in thick, scaled armor. The Kyrians were reptilian beings, standing about 7 feet tall with long limbs and elegant features. Their skin was covered in small, overlapping scales that shimmered in shades of blue and green. Their eyes were large and violet, and they moved with a fluid grace that reminded Jake of dancers. "Welcome to Carrion Prime," one of the guards said in accented English. His voice was musical, with tones that seemed to rise and fall like a song. "Princess Lara of House Valdris awaits you in the Great Hall." As they walked through the corridors, Jake noticed how cold everything was. The walls were made of living ice that pulsed with soft light, and the air was so frigid that his breath came out in white clouds. The Kyrians seemed comfortable in there, heavy armor and thick clothing, but Jake found himself shivering despite his warm jacket. The Great Hall was enormous, with a ceiling that stretched up into darkness. Dozens of Kyrians sat on benches carved from ice, all wrapped in layers of thick fabric. At the front of the room, on a raised platform, sat Princess Lyra. Jake's first impression of her was that she looked cold. While the other Kyrians seemed merely bundled up against the weather, the princess appeared to be fighting a losing battle against the chill. She wore multiple layers of what looked like thermal clothing, and even from a distance Jake could see her hands shaking slightly. But there was something else about her that caught his attention. Her violet eyes were sharp and intelligent, and they seemed to be studying the human delegation with great interest. When her gaze fell on Jake, he felt a strange chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Ambassador Carter, Princess," Lyra said, rising from her seat. Her voice was clear and strong, but Jake noticed she moved carefully, as if her joints were stiff. "We welcome you to our world in these difficult times." The ambassador stepped forward and bowed in the Carrion fashion, touching her forehead with both hands. "Your Highness, we come bearing offers of friendship and mutual benefit. Earth stands ready to help Carrion Prime in your time of need." "Your reputation precedes you, Ambassador," the princess replied, "but I confess I am more interested in your companions." Her eyes moved across the human delegation, lingering on each member before settling on Jake. "Particularly your engineer." Jake felt heat rise in his cheeks. He had not expected to be singled out so quickly. "Commander Jake Morrison, Your Highness," he said, attempting the same bow he had seen the ambassador perform. "Commander Morrison," she repeated as if testing the sound of his name. "I have read your reports on thermal regulation systems. Very impressive work for one so young." "Thank you, Your Highness," Jake replied, unsure of what else to say. The formal presentations continued for the next hour. The Kyrians explained their situation in careful, diplomatic language. Their sun was entering a cooling phase, and their planet was growing colder each year. Their ancient heating systems were failing, and their people were struggling to survive. What they didn't say, but Jake could see clearly, was that they were desperate. The proud, elegant beings around him were slowly freezing to death, and their civilization was in danger of collapse. Ambassador Carter presented Earth's offer: advanced heating technology in exchange for access to the rare crystalline deposits that covered much of Kyrian Prime. The crystals were essential for humanity's new generation of faster-than-light engines, making this trade agreement crucial for both species throughout the negotiations. Jake found himself watching Princess Lyra. She spoke little, but when she did, her words carried weight. The other Kyrians clearly respected her, and several times Jake saw them looking to her for guidance before responding to the ambassador's proposals. What struck him most was how she seemed to be studying him. Every time he looked up, her violet eyes were focused on him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. She asked questions about human physiology that seemed oddly specific. "Your people adapt well to different climates," she observed during a break in the formal talks. "How do you maintain your body temperature in such cold conditions?" Jake looked down at himself. He was wearing a simple jacket over his uniform, far less clothing than any of the Kyrians. "We generate our own heat," he explained. "Human metabolism produces thermal energy as a byproduct of converting food to energy." "Fascinating," she said, and there was something in her tone that suggested this was more than casual curiosity. "You are comfortable in our palace?" "It's cold," Jake admitted, "but not unbearable. We can adapt to most environments with the right preparation." The princess nodded slowly, as if filing this information away for later use. As the evening progressed, the formal negotiations gave way to a reception. The Kyrians served a meal of exotic foods that had been heated to near-boiling temperatures, and everyone gathered around large heating crystals that glowed with warm orange light. Jake found himself separated from the other humans as the Kyrians asked him technical questions about heating systems and thermal engineering. He answered as best he could, but he noticed that Princess Lyra listened to every word he said with intense focus. "Your people are remarkable," she said during a quiet moment. "You radiate heat like small suns. I can feel the warmth from here." Jake looked around and realized she was right. The Kyrians had to huddle close to their heating crystals to stay warm, but he was standing comfortably several feet away from any heat source. His human body was generating enough warmth to keep him comfortable in conditions that required the natives to wear heavy armor. "I suppose we take it for granted," he said. "We don't think about it much." "No," she said quietly. "I imagine you don't." There was something sad in her voice, but before Jake could ask about it, 2 palace guards approached him. "Commander Morrison," one of them said, "Princess Lyra requests a private audience." Jake looked around for Ambassador Carter, but she was deep in conversation with several Kyrian nobles on the other side of the room. "Now?" he asked. "Her Highness does not like to be kept waiting." The guard replied. Jake hesitated, but refusing a direct request from their host would be diplomatically disastrous. "Of course," he said. "Lead the way." As the guards escorted him from the great hall, Jake caught a glimpse of Princess Lyra watching him leave. There was something in her expression that he couldn't quite read, but it sent a chill down his spine that had nothing to do with the cold air of the palace. The corridors they led him through were different from the ones they had used earlier. These passages were narrower and more private, lit by smaller crystals that cast dancing shadows on the ice walls. Jake's footsteps echoed in the silence, mixing with the soft sound of the guard's scaled feet on the frozen floor. He had no idea that he was walking toward a trap that would change his life forever. The guard stopped in front of a door made of solid crystal. Jake could see through it into a room beyond, but the crystal was so thick that everything looked blurred and strange. One of the guards placed his hand on a panel beside the door, and it slid open with a soft whisper. "The princess will join you shortly," the guard said, gesturing for Jake to enter. Jake stepped into the room and immediately felt the difference. If the rest of the palace was cold, this chamber was absolutely freezing. His breath came out in thick white clouds, and he could feel the cold seeping through his jacket and into his bones. The door closed behind him with a soft click. The room was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. The walls were made of what looked like living ice, pulsing with pale blue light that seemed to come from deep within the frozen material. The ceiling was high and curved, carved with intricate patterns that caught and reflected the light in beautiful ways. Furniture made from single blocks of ice filled the space, each piece polished to a mirror shine dot in the center of the room. Stood a large bed, also carved from ice, but covered with thick furs and blankets. Heating crystals were placed around the room, but they seemed smaller and dimmer than the ones in the Great Hall. Jake realized that even by Kiryan standards, this room was uncomfortably cold. "You are wondering why I brought you here," came a voice from behind him. Jake turned to see Princess Lyra entering through a second door he hadn't noticed. She was wrapped in even more layers than before, wearing what looked like multiple thermal suits under a thick robe. Her movements were slow and careful, and Jake could see her shivering despite all the clothing. "Your Highness," Jake said, attempting another bow. "I'm honored by your invitation, but I should return to my delegation. Ambassador Carter will be wondering where I am." "I'm afraid that won't be possible," she said, moving closer to one of the heating crystals. "You see, Commander, Morris and I have a problem. A very serious problem that only you can help me with." Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "What kind of problem?" Princess Lyra was quiet for a long moment, staring at the glowing crystal beside her. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I am dying, Commander. Slowly, but surely I am freezing to death." "But you're Kiryan," Jake said, confused. "This is your natural environment." "Not for me," she replied. "I have a genetic condition that affects my ability to regulate temperature. While other Kiryans can maintain their body heat in normal conditions, I cannot. As our world grows colder, I grow weaker." She moved away from the heating crystal, and Jake could see her whole body shaking. "The palace physicians have tried everything. Special treatments, experimental drugs, even surgery. Nothing works. They give me weeks, perhaps a month before. My body simply shuts down." Jake felt sorry for her, but he still didn't understand why she had brought him here. "I'm not a doctor, Your Highness. I don't know how I can help you." "You can help me," she said, "simply by being here. In the short time you have been on our world, I have felt warmer than I have in months. Your people generate heat like living furnaces. I can feel it from across the room." Jake looked down at himself. He was cold, but not unbearably so. His human body was working hard to maintain its temperature, generating heat through muscle movement and metabolic processes. To him, it was automatic, but he was beginning to understand what it meant to someone who was slowly freezing to death. "You want me to stay here?" he asked. "I need you to stay here," she corrected, "close to me, to share your warmth. It may be the only thing that can keep me alive long enough to find a real solution." Jake moved toward the door, but as he approached it, he felt a strange resistance. The air itself seemed to push back against him, and when he tried to touch the door handle, his hand passed through it as if it wasn't there. "You have activated some kind of barrier," he said, turning back to face her. "I had to," she replied. "I cannot risk you leaving, and I cannot risk the other noble houses learning of my condition. If they knew how weak I truly am, it would destabilize our entire government at the worst possible time." Jake felt anger rising in his chest. "You've trapped me here. What about my delegation? What about the trade negotiations?" "Your absence will be explained," she said. "Palace guards will report that you became lost in a storm while exploring the outer courtyards. Such things happen to visitors who are not prepared for our weather. Your people will mourn your loss and continue with their mission. They'll search. For me, they will search for a body in the snow," she said sadly. "They will not think to look for you in the private chambers of a dying princess." Jake stared at her in disbelief. This elegant, refined woman had just calmly explained how she was going to fake his death and hold him prisoner. "This is kidnapping," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "It is. And I am deeply sorry for it, but I am also desperate. My people are facing extinction, and I am the only one who might be able to save them. But I cannot do that if I freeze to death first." She moved closer to him, and Jake could see the desperation in her violet eyes. "I have been working on solutions to our crisis for months. New heating technologies, better distribution systems, ways to make our cities more efficient. But my condition has been getting worse, and I am running out of time. What makes you think I can help with that?" I have studied your people extensively, she said. Your engineering reports, your technical manuals, your approaches to problem solving. Human thermal engineering is far more advanced than ours because you have had to adapt to so many different environments. You think about heat in ways we never have. Jake felt some of his anger fading, replaced by curiosity. What kind of solutions have you been working on? Come, she said, leading him to a table covered with papers and crystal tablets. Let me show you. The documents were covered with diagrams and calculations that Jake recognized as engineering schematics. They were designs for heating systems, but unlike anything he had ever seen. The Kyrians had been trying to create more efficient ways to distribute heat throughout their cities, but their approaches were limited by their biology. Your people are ectothermic, Jake said, studying the plans. You rely on external heat sources. But these designs are still thinking in terms of heating the environment around you. Yes, she said. How else would we think about it? Jake picked up one of the crystal tablets and began sketching with his finger. Humans are endothermic. We generate heat internally through metabolic processes. What if you could do the same thing? Princess Lyra stared at the rough diagram he had drawn. Generate our own heat, that's impossible. We don't have the biological systems for it. But you could create artificial ones, Jake said, his engineering mind beginning to work on the problem. Implants, maybe, or external devices that mimic human metabolism. The power requirements would be enormous, she said, but Jake could see interest growing in her eyes. Not necessarily, he replied. Human metabolism is actually very efficient. We convert food directly into energy, including thermal energy. If you could create a system that does the same thing with your food sources, they work together. For hours, Jake sketching ideas while Princess Lyra provided details about Kyrian physiology and energy systems. As they worked, she moved closer to him, drawn by the heat his body was generating. You are very warm, she said during a break in their work. I can feel it even through all these layers. Jake looked at her and realized she was right. Despite the freezing temperature of the room, he was comfortable. His body was working hard to maintain its temperature, but it was succeeding. And the heat he was generating was helping keep her alive. This is wrong, he said quietly. Holding me here against my will? I know, she replied. But I also know that in the past few hours I have felt better than I have in weeks. And we have made more progress on solving our heating crisis than I have in months of working alone. Jake looked around the frozen chamber that was now his prison. The ice walls seemed to pulse with their own life, and the heating crystals cast dancing shadows across the floor. It was beautiful, but it was also a cage. How long? He asked. I don't know, she said honestly. Until we find a solution that can save my people, or until I die trying. Jake realized that his fate was now tied to hers. If she died, he would likely die too, trapped in this frozen room with no way to escape. But if they could work together, if they could find a way to solve the crisis facing Kyrian Prime, maybe they could both survive. Then we better get to work, he said. Turning back to the crystal tablets. Princess Lyra smiled for the first time since he had arrived. It was a sad smile, but it was real. Thank you, Commander Morrison. You may have just saved my world. As night fell over the palace, Jake found himself wondering if anyone was looking for him yet. But as he watched the princes studying there, work with renewed hope in her eyes, he realized that maybe, just maybe, being trapped here wasn't the worst thing that could have happened to him. Jake woke up on the third day of his imprisonment feeling stiff and cold. He had been sleeping on a smaller ice bed that Princess Lyra had ordered brought into the chamber. The furs and blankets helped, but nothing could completely block out the freezing air that filled the room. Princess Lyra was already awake, sitting at the work table with crystal tablets spread around her. She looked worse than she had the day before. Her skin had taken on a grayish tone, and her movements were even slower and more careful. You should eat something, she said without looking up from her work. The servants left food by the door. Jake found a tray of strange-looking items that he assumed were Kyrian breakfast foods. Everything was heated to near boiling temperatures, and steam rose from the dishes in the cold air. He took a few bites, but the flavors were alien and difficult to swallow. "How long has your world been getting colder?" he asked, joining her at the table. "The changes began about 50 years ago," she replied. "At first, it was gradual, a few degrees each year. We thought it was just a natural climate cycle that would eventually reverse itself." She pulled up a holographic display from one of the crystal tablets. Jake could see a chart showing temperature readings over time. The line dropped steadily, year after year, with no sign of stopping. "Our scientists studied our sun and discovered that it was entering a cooling phase," she continued. "Not unusual for a star of its age, but much earlier than we had predicted. The cooling will continue for at least another century." "What about your orbital heating stations?" Jake asked. "The mission briefings mentioned that your people use satellites to supplement solar heating." Princess Lyra's expression grew darker. "They are failing. One by one, they shut down or malfunction. We have lost 12 of them in the past year alone. Each time one fails, another region of our planet becomes uninhabitable." She switched the display to show a map of Kyrian Prime. Jake could see large areas marked in blue, indicating regions that were now too cold for Kyrian habitation. The safe zones were shrinking rapidly. "My people are being forced to migrate to the warmer regions near the equator," she said. "But even those areas are becoming colder each year. We estimate that within 20 years, the entire planet will be uninhabitable for our species." Jake studied the map, his engineering mind working on the problem. "What about evacuation? Moving your people to warmer worlds?" "We have explored that option," she said. "But there are over 8 billion Kyrians on this world. Even if we could build enough ships, which we cannot, where would we go? Most habitable worlds are already occupied by other species. Earth would help," Jake said. "We have colony worlds that could accommodate refugees." Princess Lyra looked at him with sad eyes. "Would you? Would your people really welcome 8 billion aliens into their space? And what would happen to our culture, our civilization? We would become scattered refugees, dependent on the charity of others." Jake didn't have a good answer for that. He knew that human space was vast, but the logistics of relocating an entire species would be incredibly difficult. And she was right about the cultural impact. The Kyrians would lose everything that made them who they were. "That's why I have been working so hard on a solution," she continued. "There must be a way to save our world, to let our people stay in their homes. But I am running out of time." She stood up from the table, but her legs seemed unsteady. Jake quickly moved to support her, and as he did, he felt how cold her body was. Even through her thick clothing, she felt like ice. "You're getting worse," he said. "Yes," she admitted, "the cold is winning. My body is shutting down piece by piece. Soon I will not be able to think clearly enough to work on solutions." Jake helped her to the ice bed, where she collapsed onto the furs with exhaustion. "Tell me about your condition," he said. "How does it work?" "Normal Kyrians have a special organ that helps regulate body temperature," she explained. "It's similar to what you might call a liver, but it processes heat instead of toxins. My organ never developed properly. I was born with only a partial version of it." "So you can't generate heat or store it effectively?" "Exactly. I can absorb heat from external sources, but I cannot maintain it. My body loses heat much faster than normal. As the planet gets colder, I get colder with it." Jake sat beside her on the bed, and immediately he could see her relax slightly as his body heat reached her. "In the old days, when the planet was warmer, it wasn't such a problem. But now ... now you're dying," he finished for her. "Yes, and when I die, the research dies with me. I am the only one who has been working on these advanced heating solutions. The other nobles are too busy fighting over resources and territory to think about long-term solutions." Jake looked around the frozen chamber. "Is this why you live in such a cold room, to hide your condition?" "Partly," she said. "If the other nobles knew how weak I am, they would try to remove me from power. They would argue that someone with my condition cannot lead during a crisis. But also, This room is connected to the palace's main heating system. I have been using it to test new heating technologies. She pointed to panels in the walls that Jake hadn't noticed before. Those are experimental heating units. I have been trying different approaches, different power sources, different distribution methods, but nothing has been effective enough. What about the heating crystals? Jake asked. They seem to work well. They do, but they are not renewable. The crystals are mined from deep beneath the planet's surface, and we are running out of them. Within 10 years, we will have exhausted all the easily accessible deposits. Jake began to understand the full scope of the crisis. It wasn't just about the planet getting colder. It was about the failure of every system the Kyrians had built to keep themselves warm. Their sun was cooling, their orbital heaters were failing, and their heating crystals were running out. You said you've been studying human engineering, he said. What specifically? Princess Lyra managed a weak smile. Everything. Your heating systems, your power generation, your approaches to thermal management, but what interests me most is your biology. You create heat as a byproduct of living. It's remarkable. We take it for granted, Jake said. Every human does it automatically. But that's exactly what makes it so brilliant, she replied. You don't need external heat sources. You don't need special equipment or rare materials. You just need food, and your body converts it into heat and energy. Jake thought about this. Human metabolism was indeed efficient, but it was also the result of millions of years of evolution. You can't just change your biology overnight. No, she agreed. But maybe we can create artificial systems that do the same thing. Devices that convert food into heat, that can be worn or implanted. Personal heating systems that work like human metabolism. That's what we were working on yesterday, Jake said, remembering their sketches and calculations. Yes, but I realize, now that I was thinking too small, I was trying to create individual solutions for individual Kyrians. But what if we could create a system that works for everyone? Something that could heat entire cities, entire regions? Jake felt excitement building in his chest. A planetary metabolism? A system that converts organic matter into heat on a massive scale. Exactly, she said, her eyes brightening despite her weakness. But it would require understanding human biology in ways that we never have before. And it would require resources and cooperation that our people have never attempted. What kind of resources? Massive amounts of organic matter to fuel the system. New types of technology that we don't currently possess. And most importantly, cooperation between our species. We would need human knowledge and human help to make it work. Jake realized that she was talking about more than just a heating system. She was talking about a complete transformation of how the Kyrians survived on their world. This would change everything about your civilization. Yes, she said, it would. But the alternative is extinction. They worked together for the rest of the day, refining their ideas and calculating requirements. Jake found himself impressed by Princess Lyra's intelligence and determination. Despite her failing health, she grasped complex engineering concepts quickly and contributed ideas that he wouldn't have thought of as evening approached. She moved closer to him, seeking warmth. You are saving my life, she said quietly. By being here, by sharing your heat, you are keeping me alive. Jake looked down at her. She was leaning against his side, and he could feel how cold she was even through her thick clothing. I'm not doing anything special. This is just how humans are built. That's what makes it special, she replied. You risk nothing, sacrifice. Nothing, and yet you give me the one thing I need most. Your people really are remarkable. Jake felt strange emotions stirring in his chest. He was still angry about being trapped, but he was also beginning to understand why she had done it. She wasn't just trying to save herself. She was trying to save her entire world. What happens if we succeed? He asked. What happens if we find a solution? Then we try to convince my people to accept it, she said. And we try to convince your people to help us build it, and we hope that there is enough time left to save everyone. And if we fail? Princess Lyra was quiet for a long moment. Then I die, and you die with me. And eventually my people die too, the cold winds? On the 7th day of his imprisonment, Jake made a discovery that changed everything. He was studying carrion biological charts when he noticed something that the princes had missed. The organ that controlled their temperature regulation wasn't just a single structure. It was connected to their entire circulatory system in ways that reminded him of human heart function. Lyra, he said, using her name without the formal title for the first time. She had grown too weak for ceremonies, and they had been working so closely that titles seemed unnecessary. She looked up from where she was lying on the bed, wrapped in every blanket they could find. Her condition had gotten much worse over the past few days. Sometimes she shivered so violently that she couldn't hold the crystal tablets steady enough to work. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think I understand the real difference between humans and Kyrians," he said, excitement building in his voice. "It's not just about generating heat. It's about circulation. Look at this." He brought the tablet over to her and showed her a diagram of human cardiovascular system that he had sketched alongside Kyrian anatomy. Human hearts pump blood continuously, carrying heat throughout our bodies. But your circulation system is different. It moves much slower, and it doesn't distribute heat effectively. Princess Lyra studied the diagrams with interest, despite her weakness. "So even if we could generate heat like humans, we couldn't move it around our bodies properly?" "Exactly," Jake said. "But that's also the solution. We don't need to make Kyrians generate heat like humans. We need to make them circulate it like humans." "I don't understand." Jake sat on the edge of the bed, and as always, she moved closer to him for warmth. Over the past week, this had become natural for both of them. He was her personal heater, and she was his research partner. "What if we created an external circulation system?" he explained. "Something that could pump heated fluid through clothing, or through implants under the skin, like artificial blood vessels that carry heat instead of nutrients." Princess Lyra's eyes widened. "A wearable heating system that mimics human circulation, that could work." "More than that," Jake continued, his engineering mind racing ahead. "We could connect multiple systems together. Create heating networks that link people to buildings, buildings to city blocks to entire regions. A planetary circulation system, using what as the heat source?" Jake smiled. "That's the beautiful part. We use the one thing your planet has plenty of: organic waste, food scraps, dead plants, even sewage. We create massive conversion facilities that break down organic matter and convert it into thermal energy, just like human metabolism does with food." Princess Lyra struggled to sit up, despite her weakness. "It could work," she said, her voice gaining strength as she thought through the implications. "We have huge amounts of organic waste, and if we could process it efficiently enough, we could heat entire cities," Jake finished. "The more people you have, the more waste you produce, the more heat you can generate. Instead of the population being a burden during the crisis, it becomes part of the solution." They worked feverishly for the next several hours, despite Princess Lyra's declining condition. Jake did most of the technical calculations while she provided information about Kyrian infrastructure and resource distribution. By evening, they had created a rough design for what they were calling the biothermal network. The system would work in stages. Small conversion units would be installed in homes and businesses, processing local organic waste into heated fluid. These units would be connected to larger processors at the neighborhood level, which would feed into citywide systems. At the top of the network, massive planetary processors would handle the waste from entire regions. "The beauty of it is scalability," Jake explained as they reviewed their work. "You can start small with individual units and gradually connect them into larger networks. As the system grows, it becomes more efficient. But the initial construction would require enormous resources," Princess Lyra said. "Materials we don't have, technology we haven't developed, cooperation between houses that have been fighting each other for decades." "That's where my people come in," Jake replied. "Earth has the manufacturing capability and the technical knowledge. This could be part of our trade agreement. Instead of just selling you heating equipment, we help you build a completely new infrastructure. Princess Lyra was quiet for a long moment. It would mean admitting to the other houses that our current systems are failing. It would mean accepting help from aliens. Many of our people would see it as surrendering our independence. The alternative is extinction, Jake said gently. Yes, she agreed. The alternative is extinction. As night fell, Princess Lyra's condition took a dramatic turn for the worse. Her shivering became so severe that she couldn't speak clearly, and her skin took on a blue-gray color that Jake had never seen before. He realized that she was approaching the final stages of hypothermia. Lyra, he said, moving closer to her on the bed. Stay with me. We're almost finished with the design. So cold, she whispered. Can't think clearly anymore. Jake made a decision that he knew would change everything. He pulled off his jacket and outer shirt, then carefully moved closer to her under the blankets. His body heat, unfiltered by clothing, immediately began warming the air around them. What are you doing? She asked, though her shivering decreased noticeably. Sharing heat more efficiently, he said. This is how humans survived in cold climates before we had advanced technology. We shared body warmth. For the first time in days, Princess Lyra stopped shivering completely. Color began to return to her skin, and her breathing became more regular. This is improper, she said, but she didn't move away from him. This is survival, Jake replied. We can worry about propriety after we save your world. They lay together under the thick furs, Jake's human body heat slowly warming her frozen form. As her condition stabilized, they continued working on their designs using a crystal tablet that she held between them. There's something else, Princess Lyra said as her thinking became clearer. Something I haven't told you about my condition. What is it? The genetic defect that affects my temperature. Regulation, she said. It's not as rare as we thought. Recent medical surveys suggest that as much as 10% of our population may have some form of it. As the planet gets colder, more and more Kyrians are beginning to show symptoms. Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. 10%, that's 800 million people. Yes, and unlike me, most of them don't have access to healing crystals or thermal clothing. They are dying in the outer settlements, in the rural areas, anywhere that doesn't have adequate heating infrastructure. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because it makes the problem so much worse, she said. It's not just about saving the general population from a gradually cooling planet. It's about saving millions of people who are dying right now, today, because they can't regulate their body temperature. Jake understood now why she had been so desperate, why she had been willing to kidnap him and fake his death. She wasn't just trying to save her civilization in some distant future. She was trying to save people who were dying every day while they worked. How long do they have? He asked. Some of them, maybe weeks. Others might last through the winter if they're lucky. But as the planet continues to cool, the number of affected people will grow exponentially. Jake looked at their designs with new urgency. What had seemed like a long-term solution now needed to be implemented immediately. We need to simplify the design, he said. Make it something that can be built quickly with materials you already have. Portable units, Princess Lyra agreed. Something that can be distributed to the affected populations while we work on the larger network. They spent the rest of the night redesigning their system, creating a simpler version that could be manufactured quickly using existing Kyrian technology. Instead of complex biothermal processors, they designed basic heating units that could burn organic matter directly, with simple circulation systems that could warm clothing or small shelters. As dawn approached, Jake realized that Princess Lyra had fallen asleep against his chest. Her breathing was steady and peaceful, and for the first time since he had met her, she looked truly warm. His human body heat had literally brought her back from the edge of death, but he also realized something else. Even with his heat keeping her alive, her condition was still deteriorating. The genetic defect that prevented her from regulating temperature was getting worse, and eventually, even his warmth wouldn't be enough to save her. We need to test this system, he said quietly, even though she was sleeping. And we need to do it soon. Jake looked down at the woman who had kidnapped him and destroyed his mission. She had trapped him, lied to his people, and made him a prisoner in her frozen palace. But she had also trusted him with the survival of her entire species. As he held her sleeping form against his chest, sharing his human warmth with her dying body, Jake realized that somewhere during their week together, she had stopped being his captor and started being something else entirely. She had become someone worth saving. Jake woke up on the 10th day to find Princess Lyra unconscious beside him. Her breathing was shallow and her skin had turned almost completely gray. Even with his body heat warming her throughout the night, her condition had continued to worsen. "Lyra," he said, gently shaking her shoulder, "wake up." Her eyes opened slowly, but they seemed unfocused and distant. "Jake?" she whispered. "I can't feel my hands." Jake looked at her hands and saw that her fingers had turned blue. The genetic condition was winning. Her body was shutting down piece by piece, just as she had predicted. Even his human warmth was no longer enough to keep her alive. "We need to get you medical help," he said. "No," she replied weakly. "No doctors? They would ask too many questions. And there's nothing they can do anyway. There has to be something." Princess Lyra struggled to sit up, leaning heavily against him. "There is one thing," she said. "But it would require you to make a sacrifice that I cannot ask of you." "What kind of sacrifice?" She was quiet for a long moment, gathering her strength. "Dr. Kane Williams, one of your people from the diplomatic mission. He is a medical researcher, specializing in bioenhancement technology. Before you disappeared, he had been asking questions about Kyrian physiology. Bioenhancement technology that can modify human biology," she explained. "Your people use it for adapting to different planetary environments. Modifications that allow humans to survive in high radiation, low oxygen, extreme temperatures." Jake began to understand what she was suggesting. "You want him to modify me, to make me generate more heat." "The process would be permanent," she said. "It would change your biology in ways that could never be reversed. You would become adapted to cold environments, but you would never be able to return to Earth's climate. You would be trapped here forever." Jake felt his heart racing. She was asking him to give up his entire life, his home, his future, everything he had ever known. Would it work? Would it save you? "I don't know," she admitted, "but it might. And more importantly, it might give us the biological data we need to perfect our heating system. If we can understand how enhanced human metabolism works, we can create better artificial versions for my people." "How would we even contact Dr. Williams? I'm supposed to be dead." Princess Lyra reached under her pillow and pulled out a small communication device. "I have been monitoring your delegation's activities. Dr. Williams has been conducting private research in the palace medical facilities. He could be brought here secretly." Jake stared at the device in her hands. This was his chance to contact his people, to let them know he was alive, to escape from this frozen prison. But it was also a choice between his old life and saving billions of lives on Kyrian Prime. "If I do this," he said slowly, "if I let him modify me, what happens then?" "Then we test our heating system," she replied. "We build prototypes, we distribute them to the people who are dying, and we prove that our solution works. If it does, we present it to both our governments as the basis for a new kind of alliance. And if it doesn't work, then at least we tried," she said. "And maybe the next people who work on this problem will learn from our mistakes." Jake looked around the frozen chamber that had been his home for 10 days. He thought about his life on Earth, his career in the colonial navy, the future he had planned. Then he looked at Princess Lyra, dying slowly in his arms despite all his efforts to keep her warm. "Contact Dr. Williams," he said. It took 3 hours for Dr. Williams to arrive at the chamber, brought by palace guards who believed they were escorting him to treat a sick servant. When he saw Jake alive, his surprise was so complete that he nearly dropped his medical equipment. "Jake, my God, we thought you were dead. We've been searching for your body for over a week." "I'm alive," Jake said, "but I need your help. We both do." Dr. Williams was a small, energetic man with gray hair and sharp eyes. Jake had worked with him before on other missions, and he knew the doctor was both brilliant and unconventional. In his approach to medicine, Jake and Princess Lyra explained the situation as quickly as they could. Dr. Williams listened with growing amazement as they described the crisis facing Kyrian Prime and their proposed solution. Bioenhancement to increase thermal output, Dr. Williams said, studying the data they had collected. It's possible, but extremely dangerous. The modifications would affect your entire metabolic system, your heart rate, your blood chemistry, your digestive processes. Everything would change. Would it work? Jake asked. In theory, yes. I could enhance your metabolism to generate 2 or 3 times more heat than normal. But the process would be irreversible, and there could be side effects we can't predict. Princess Lyra's breathing had become more labored during their conversation. How long would the procedure take? She asked. Several hours, Dr. Williams replied, but I would need specialized equipment that I don't have here. I can get you whatever you need, she said. The palace has medical facilities that rival anything on Earth. Jake made his decision. Do it. Jake, you need to understand what you're giving up, Dr. Williams said seriously. This modification would make you incompatible with Earth's climate. You would overheat within hours in normal human environments. You would be exiled from your own species. I understand, Jake said, but if we don't try this, millions of people will die, including her. Dr. Williams looked at Princess Lyra, then back at Jake. You care about her? Yes, Jake said simply. I do. The medical procedure took place in a hidden laboratory deep within the palace. Dr. Williams had somehow acquired all the equipment he needed, though Jake suspected that Princess Lyra had used resources and influence that she shouldn't have had. Access to the bioenhancement process was unlike anything Jake had ever experienced. Dr. Williams injected him with modified genetic material that would alter his cellular structure at the most basic level. Jake felt his body changing from the inside out, his metabolism speeding up, his heart rate increasing, his internal temperature rising. How do you feel? Dr. Williams asked as the procedure concluded. Jake sat up on the medical table and immediately felt the difference. Heat radiated from his body in waves that he could actually see in the cold air of the laboratory. Like a living furnace, he said. They returned to Princess Lyra's chamber to find her barely conscious. But when Jake approached her bed, she immediately began to revive as his enhanced body heat reached her. It worked, she said, her voice stronger than it had been in days. I can feel the warmth from across the room. Over the next week, Jake's NHANCED metabolism proved to be exactly what they needed. Not only did it keep Princess Lyra alive and functional, but it provided them with the biological data necessary to perfect their artificial heating system. Working together, they created prototypes of portable heating units that could be built quickly and distributed to the dying populations. The units used simplified versions of the metabolic processes that Dr. Williams had enhanced in Jake's body. It's time, Princess Lyra said on the 17th day of Jake's imprisonment. We need to reveal what we've accomplished and ask for help implementing it. Are you ready for that? Jake asked. Ready to tell your people about your condition, about what we've been doing here? I'm ready, she said. Thanks to you, I'm not dying anymore. Your sacrifice gave me the strength to save my world. Princess Lyra called a meeting of the noble houses and the human diplomatic delegation. When Ambassador Carter saw Jake alive, her shock was visible, but she quickly focused on the larger implications of what they had discovered. The presentation of their biothermal heating system created an immediate sensation. The Kyrian nobles, faced with the reality of their crisis and offered a genuine solution, agreed to support the project. The human delegation, amazed by Jake's sacrifice and the potential for saving an entire civilization, committed Earth's resources to the effort. Within months, the first heating networks were operational. The portable units saved thousands of lives in the outer settlements, while larger installations began warming the major cities. The biothermal technology proved to be even more effective than Jake and Princess Lyra had hoped. A year later, Jake stood on a balcony overlooking the capital city of Kyrian Prime. Snow still fell. Of the city below glowed with warmth from hundreds of heating installations. Children played in the streets, no longer forced to huddle indoors around heating crystals. Princess Lyra joined him on the balcony, no longer wearing the thick thermal clothing that had once been necessary for her survival. The bioenhancement? Data from Jake's modification had led to treatments that helped many Kyrians with similar genetic conditions. Do you regret it? She asked, taking his hand. Giving up your old life? Jake looked at her, then at the city they had saved together. No, he said. This is where I belong now. The alliance between our peoples is stronger than anyone imagined, she said. What started as a simple trade agreement has become something much more important. Humans and Kyrians working together, Jake agreed. Learning from each other? Helping each other survive. Princess Lyra smiled and moved closer to him. Even with her treatments, she still needed the warmth that his enhanced body provided. But now it was a choice, not a desperate necessity. Thank you, she said quietly. For everything. For saving my life, for saving my world, for staying with me.